Hey guys, it is Tuesday, March 2nd. Today we are going to talk about systems of government in social studies, systems of colonial government. All right, so the first we're going to talk about is monarchy. And it's one ruler who's almost always a king or queen. And they achieve their power through generations, what we call divine right, which means they believed that God put them there to rule. This is what they believed at the time. Now, what they couldn't do was deny free speech, so they couldn't tell you what you could and couldn't say. They couldn't keep their own army or military. They couldn't veto or go against laws passed by Parliament. So Parliament was this voted on body of government, like an assembly or like Congress today, that made, during this time they moved towards like democracy and like making it so that people can vote and make their own decisions. So they couldn't go against that. They did have the power to declare war. So say, oh, we're in a war now, pass laws, grant charters. And remember, charters are those agreements that paid for a colony at its start and allowed it to exist. They could also tax people without their consent. And how do you think that went? It did not go very well at all. So during this time, the monarch was King George III, but today in England it's Queen Elizabeth. And a fun fact is that she loves corgis, and she gives her corgis puppies as gifts to her friends and family. So a representative government is elected people that make decisions and pass laws. In the late 1600s, England was moving away from a monarchy. Remember that monarchy is a king and a queen, to a representative government that allowed people to vote and make their own decisions. In 1689, the English Bill of Rights was passed, giving Parliament and the people more power. So it gave people more power to vote and make their own decisions. So Parliament was England's elective governing body. They made, and still do, make decisions for the country based on what people want or wanted. So government in the colonies, usually run by one person or a few people chosen by the King of England and had to do whatever he said. The governor acted like a monarch, but they did not have all the power because people voted a lot in the colonies. They voted for assemblies, and we're going to talk about the House of Burgesses in a bit. We talked about it some earlier this year. They were paid by tax money given to them by members of the assembly, which were voted into office on behalf of the people. But if the king was mad at them, they might not get paid as soon or at all. So what they could do was bring together or get rid of the legislator, the assembly, the ones who make decisions. They could overturn or veto laws passed by the legislator, call for new elections, command a militia. A militia is those people who had different jobs but fight for a specific cause. And, make decisions about laws and taxes. So they could decide if they were going to tax the colonists more or less. So the Governor's Council was at least 6 of the richest and most powerful and influential men in the colony. It was part of the House of Burgesses, a group of influential and powerful men who gave the governor advice and support. They also advised his lieutenant governor, which just meant the man directly below the governor as far as power. In England, the same thing is known as the House of Lords. So they acted as the highest court in the colony when the governor was present. It was first called the Quarter Court and then the General Court. So the council was either set up by the assembly or the governor himself. And remember, the assembly was elected by people, so they made the decisions based on what the people wanted, not what the King of England wanted necessarily. But they usually had to ask for permission from him. So the assembly had a lot in common with Parliament in England. And remember, Parliament was voted into office and made decisions for the people. People who were voted into office by the colonists, usually white males, they eventually gained the power to carry out the laws, which means they didn't have to ask permission from the King of England anymore after a while. Who could be a part of the assembly? Adult men, originally 18 years and older, and then later 21 years and older. But they also had to own property, be Christian, be taxpayers, and have an annual income, which just means they made money every single year. And they had to meet all of those qualifications, not one, but all of them. What they could and couldn't do, they couldn't make laws against the laws of England. So if the King of England said, you have to pay this much for tea, they couldn't say, no, we're going to pay you this much. They couldn't make laws against them. Their laws had to be approved by the governor and the king. After 3 years of a law being in effect, the King of England could veto the laws in the colonies, except in Rhode Island or Connecticut, because they made their own laws. They were self-governed. So remember I said we were going to talk about the House of Burgesses? The Virginia Company was trying to attract people to Virginia, but people didn't really want to come somewhere with a really harsh and strict rules, and they didn't have a say in any rules. They were under a form of martial law, which just means they had to do whatever they were told, or there would be very bad consequences. Its first popularly elected assembly was the House of Burgesses. It was made up of 6 people from the Governor's Council, 22 elected people, 2 from each of the 11 settlements. The first session was July 30th, 1619 at a church in Jamestown, and they set a minimum price for tobacco, but they had to quit early due to an outbreak of malaria, which is a disease. Meetings were held once a year from 1619 to 1624, and in 1624, England took over the governing of the colony and restricted their power, which means they didn't allow them to do as much as they had before. They didn't allow them to do everything they wanted to. But it was a training ground for the American independence movement. A lot of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, spent a lot of time there and expressed their opinions there. And it's similar to Congress today. It passed its own laws when England passed harsh and restrictive ones, which remember we talked about they weren't supposed to do that, but they did anyways. All right, now we're going to get into our show it. So you're either going to go to 3rd or 7th period, ELA. 3rd or 7th. I'm going to go to 3rd because it's my first one here. We're on week 9, Tuesday. Lesson 53, Systems of Government, show it. All right. We're going to do what happened at the first meeting of the House of Burgesses. It was a malaria outbreak, and they set a minimum price for tobacco. In 1689, what was passed giving Parliament and the people more power was the English Bill of Rights. And laws made by the governing assembly had to be approved by the king and the governor. Until they eventually gained the power to make their own laws. All right, I'd like you guys to do the rest on your own because I know you are completely capable and you will do wonderful. All right, if you have any questions, please go back to the PowerPoint or rewatch this video. All right, have a lovely afternoon.